Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our webinar on careers and brand management. I'm Joe Sweeney, I'm Associate Director of Admissions, and I'm joined today by Sean Fulcher, who's one of our career coaches. Couple caveats. One, Sean and I don't normally dress alike. We're actually in the middle of MBA orientation, so we have staff shirts that we wear so all the new students can identify the staff pretty quickly. The other thing I'll say too is both of us come from a background in brand management. I was a 2012 MBA, spent about 4 years in the brand management space. I worked for 2 different wine import companies. So I did that for a handful of years before coming back. Sean, if you want to give a little bit about your background.
Sure. I'm a 2009 Notre Dame MBA. I worked at Procter & Gamble after leaving the program, and then made a couple of moves, one to Kraft Foods out of the New York metro area, and then one to Chicago to work with Hillshire Brands, which was then purchased by Tyson Foods. So all in, I worked about 6 years in brand management before coming back to join the coaching staff here, and I work with our students looking to get into marketing.
All right, terrific. One housekeeping note here as we go through. If you want to ask questions, please use the Q&A feature instead of the chat feature. It helps us track a little bit more easily as we go along. And we'll try and get to as many of your questions as we can in the hour. Presentation is a little shorter this week than the last time for anybody that was with us. So hopefully we'll have a good amount of time for questions. I'll turn our camera off here and we'll just keep rolling with the PowerPoint here so you guys can focus. All right, so this is kind of where we're headed for the presentation here. We'll get kind of an overview of what brand management is. What some of the steps are as you're going through an MBA program and how to set yourself up for success, where some of those big employment opportunities come from, and then, what does that look like 5, 10 years down the road? Obviously there's a lot of emphasis put on kind of what that first job out of your MBA looks like, but you start to think about a career holistically, what does that look like in the long term? All right, so I'll kind of tee up each of these and then let Sean kind of jump in and roll through a little bit more in terms of content. So we'll start off with kind of base question: what's brand management?
Sure. So I guess the easiest way to explain brand management is to call it running your own small business. So when we talk about brand management, we're typically talking about the consumer goods industry, consumer products. These are tangible things that consumers interact with on a daily basis. So that's how you get that consumer products or consumer goods industry nomenclature. But you're given a chunk of their organization, whether it be a brand or a sub-brand, and then you run it for them. And so you've got the resources of a much larger corporation backing you, but ultimately you're the business owner. One way that this is often explained is brand managers act as the hub of the wheel. And I've got a slide later to walk you through what exactly that means. But essentially, you're in the middle of this team. You're working with folks from a number of different functions, and you're ultimately who they look at when decisions need to be made. So you can, I guess, think of yourself also as a quarterback for this cross-functional team with team members from a number of different positions, if you will. And then one thing to highlight, this is a big deal in the consumer products industry and brand management career paths generally, is profit and loss responsibility. And so if you're not familiar with that term, profit and loss statement or an income statement, but essentially it's the financial health of the business. And you manage that as you go throughout the year to make sure your expenses are managed and you're hitting your revenue targets and those types of things. And he who owns the profit and loss statement typically gets to make the decisions. And so having responsibility for essentially the financial status of the brand is a good place to be. And that's one of the key things offered within a brand management career.
One of the things I'll just kind of add on to that too, from a color standpoint, brand management is really one of the few functions that you can go into that has P&L responsibility, especially at this kind of level that you'll be going into. I was speaking with one of my friends who is a classmate through the MBA program. He spent 4.5 years as a consultant with BCG and just transitioned to a new job. And we were kind of talking about what he wanted to do next and where he wanted it to take him. And he said, I'd love to have something that has P&L responsibility. And I turned to him and I said, I've had that for the last 4 years. You picked the wrong career field. So if that's something that interests you, this is a really good place to kick off your career.
Yeah, so I know this can be kind of confusing. So I think the simplest way to explain this, imagine yourself in this situation. You join a team. In this case, let's say it's Mondelez International right outside of New York City. And somebody says, welcome to the team. Your responsibility is the Sour Patch Kids brand. Here are your financial targets. Here is your team. Go. I mean, that's really what you're talking about here. So I happen to used to work for Mondelez International. I was a brand manager for the Sour Patch brand. And that's really what it boils down to. There's, very little direction from above, especially if you're able to achieve your financial objectives. And you work with this team to just figure things out and deliver what the company's looking for from your brand portfolio. And then to go back to the hub of the wheel concept, you can kind of think of it this way. So right in the middle of this wheel was the brand manager in this case. And then you work with folks from a number of different functions, for everything from sales to market research to research and development. You've got to be working with the finance guys on a regular basis. And then there's even, supply chain and operations related activities that you will get involved in. I guess one of the good things about being a brand manager is that you have your hands involved in all of these different areas. At times, I was frustrated by feeling like I was in the hot seat regardless of the situation. So one time when I was working for Hillshire Brands, one of our turkey processing plants burned down. And you'd think that's a pretty big deal for the supply chain and operations teams, and it was. But ultimately, the VP called me. I had to go into work the next morning early, and I had to start working on a plan for how we're going to work around that. And so if you relish being in the hot seat, making decisions, and leading a team, it's a great spot to be. And especially if you like exposure to a number of different activities within the organization. And that's to say nothing of the creative agency and media aspects, where despite the fact that you're involved in all of these different areas, you are the lead for anything that faces the consumer. So what I didn't put on this chart was, your TV agency or your digital agency. Those are all things you'd be involved in as well.
All right, so one of the big questions that we get a lot is, what's the difference between brand management and product management? Especially if you're kind of in the marketing space, there's sometimes a little bit of confusion between those two. So we just kind of want to clarify a couple of those points. And again, take these as directional more than anything. Every company is going to call their roles a little bit differently based on what it is. I've had job titles that said marketing manager when I was actually a brand manager. I worked in an industry where brand managers had nothing to do with brand management whatsoever. So pay attention to kind of the details of what the position entails, but at a high level, this is kind of generally a good guide for the difference between the two.
Yeah, and I'd say this has evolved quite a bit. But let's start with brand management. It's been around forever. If you don't know, the origins of the soap opera, hopefully all of you have heard of a soap opera. That was actually launched by Procter & Gamble a long time ago because they needed some vehicle by which they could sell soap to housewives at home. And so they launched this soap opera concept, and P&G from that really created brand management. So it's been around for decades, nearly 100 years at Procter & Gamble alone. And so it's very well established. You're given a specific brand that you have ownership of. Like we talked about, it generally includes profit and loss responsibility for that brand. And you're focused on everything from high-level brand strategy to more, intangible aspects like brand equity. How do consumers feel about your brand? And then what are the specific benefits offered by your brand or your product line? And so if you compare that to what product management is about, we used to say product management is just like brand management, but it's in the tech space. But product management has really exploded. We might have to get to a point where we say brand management is like product management for consumer products. But product management is a little bit more generally, a little bit more technically focused on very specific products or product lines. So you'll see that happen in technology companies. You'll see it a little bit in healthcare industry as well. But there are some differences here. As opposed to high-level brand strategy and equity and how people feel about your brand, I'd say it's much more focused on features and benefits. For example, at Amazon, they've got this lineup of Echo devices. How do I make sure these Echo devices have the right features, the right benefits, and it's really all about continuous improvement of that product line. And there's not going to be large studies to gauge how consumers generally feel about the Echo brand. It's not really that. As long as the Echo delivers from a features and benefits perspective, the team managing that product line should be happy. Now, one other thing to note here, and this is a pretty significant difference, is product management roles typically do not involve profit and loss responsibility. And so, that in some cases appeals to some folks, and in other cases might turn them off, because again, if you own the P&L, it just comes with a more sense of overall responsibility than if you've got to go to other people to make those decisions. Now, again, like Joe said, it's one thing to compare brand to product, and we can do that fairly simply. To try to compare all the different iterations of product management is really tough. And so you're going to find some roles that will come with P&L responsibility and some that don't. And you'll see a number of different job titles: product marketing manager, product manager. There's quite a bit of variety as you look from firm to firm. But generally think brands versus products, P&L responsibility versus not having it, and more high-level strategy than very specific features and benefits. Now, one thing, we talked about this briefly when we showed that wheel slide, but obviously there's this whole consumer-facing aspect of brand management. And so imagine this is your target consumer. She's making decisions on a regular basis. These consumer products are things that she talks about and deals with on a daily basis. And so breaking through with communications that resonate with this consumer is really important, and that drives things like product development. So if you click on the next slide, this is a fairly recent, I guess it's probably been around about a decade now, but Swiffer, the new product launched by Procter & Gamble, all built around this consumer insight that they were looking for a better way to a quick clean. Think back 10, 15 years ago, to clean your kitchen floors required getting out a bucket of water and a mop, and it was a really time-intensive, labor-intensive activity. And P&G stumbled onto this insight, developed a new product, and then put an advertising campaign around it. And so that's a big part of managing brands as well. And if you go to the next slide, now that you've got this product, also this, TV advertisements, print advertisements are called creative in the industry. And so developing breakthrough creative, this is very famous. I'm a PC, I'm a Mac that used to run for many years. This next slide, Smell Like a Man, famous from Old Spice, again, about 10 years ago. But these are ads that resonate with consumers in a way that drives significant purchase interest and helps build their business to a very large degree. So that's a big part of the job as well.
It might sound kind of weird on the outside to think about some of those particulars within the creative too. I mean, I've sat in meetings, and Sean, I'm sure you have too, where you spend an hour fighting over colors or an hour fighting over 2 words, something like that. But when you think about kind of the full scale implication on a lot of these things, there's a really real, really tangible result to a lot of them. If you're dealing with a large consumer products company, you're talking about billion-dollar brands. So having the wrong word on an advertising campaign, or having a wrong color, or having a typo on the package or something like that, it's a really big deal and can have lasting consequences. So there are times when it feels a little fluffy, but the bottom line implications, and again with having a P&L responsibility, they're your bottom line implications. It's a really big piece of the job. So all right, so let's talk a little bit about kind of how the MBA will set you up for success in here, and kind of the both key skills and what a kind of codified path looks like through our concentrations.
Sure. So obviously the lead concentration would be marketing. And I'd say most students will choose that if they're looking to get into brand management. Now at Notre Dame, we offer the opportunity to have 2 concentrations. And so you'll see students in many cases pick up something like consulting or business analytics as a secondary concentration. Consulting, I think the brand management job and a consulting job are more similar than many people understand. There's a lot of strategy involved. There's application of frameworks. There's innovation. There's problem solving. And so I'd say the skill sets are pretty similar, which can make consulting a good secondary concentration. Business analytics, I probably don't have to tell the folks on this call how advanced companies are getting in terms of their ability to leverage analytics and inform their strategies based on those analytics. And so being good with data and analytics, even if you're not running the regressions, the ability to dive into a spreadsheet and quickly find the key insights and then translate those into business strategies is really important. And so Notre Dame is gaining strength in the business analytics space. And I see a lot of students go that way. Now, that said, there are plenty of other concentrations. You know, having a strong financial background would benefit you. And even if it's a more general management minded track like business leadership can pay dividends, because ultimately these companies are looking for leaders to come into the organization. And so there's a lot of openness. I would say brand management generally is one of the most open paths to career change, because there aren't a ton of undergrad facing brand management roles anyway. So basically everybody that gets into those brand management roles needs to go get an MBA that level sets and therefore is open to a lot of different tracks. From a skills perspective, like I mentioned, leadership and communications, those are probably, you're going to find those in 99% of any job postings you see for brand management. But of course, there's a strategy element. We talked about data. Being able to not, put ugly spreadsheets in front of people is pretty important. So data visualization is big. There's a huge forecasting element, and of course, budgeting. When you've got P&L responsibility, you've got to manage the cost side as well as the revenue side. And to bring this to life, I pulled on the next slide. This is a recent job posted by Conagra Brands in Chicago. And I just pulled this because this is very, very consistent with what you'll see across job postings in the brand management space. You generally will see this MBA highly preferred. You see the proven track record of leading and managing teams. Strategic and analytical capabilities rise to the top. You see the communication, and I'd say more importantly, the ability to influence up and down within an organization. Flexible processes, you're talking in many cases about new product launches, and those don't always work exactly the way you've thought, or in many cases, the business model hasn't yet been perfected. So you've got to be flexible. And then, in many cases, you'll see companies say, if you've managed a P&L statement before, that'll work in your favor. But by and large, students haven't. And so, this combined with the skills slide previously should give you a sense of what recruiters and hiring managers are looking for in talent.
All right, so let's take a look at where some of our students have gone and kind of what that looks like in the short, medium, and long term here. So obviously, class of 2017 just graduated in May, and we had a number of folks move into brand management roles. You can see kind of the specific roles and companies on the slide here. And so this is, I'd say, fairly typical for kind of a first step in. You're typically going to move into an ABM role, so you'll be working with a team. You'll have a little bit of hierarchy above you, and then that's kind of a jumping off place.
Yeah, I mean, basically, you'll see assistant or associate brand manager. Don't read any differences into those titles. It's just different companies that put different labels on them, but the job would be fairly similar.
All right, so from a 5-year out snapshot, this is actually my class. So these are all my classmates that are going through. So again, each company is going to label their positions a little bit differently. So senior versus brand manager versus marketing manager. In terms of the roles and responsibilities, they're all going to be fairly similar, fairly equivalent. The other thing that's going to make a big difference in terms of your advancement from year 1 to year 5 is going to be kind of the opportunity and the structure within the company. Something like Abbott Nutrition, they've been, a fairly small organization from, in comparison with some of the larger brand companies that are out there. So they've had a little bit more opportunity for growth and advancement for my classmate who's there. Somebody like Tyson Foods and Starbucks, they're a little bit bigger. The other thing that I'll say too is don't sleep on a brand name or a parent company that you may not have heard of. So I put these bottom two on to illustrate the point. Puig is they're a fragrance and beauty company that's headquartered out of Spain. They do about $2 billion worth of revenue a year. That's pretty legit. They're one of the largest beauty providers in Europe, and they play pretty heavily in South America as well. I'm guessing probably none of you have heard of Elisir, but I'm sure that most of you have heard of Transitions Lenses. So a lot of times your parent companies are going to sit above brands. So the companies that you're going to be targeting are not necessarily going to be the brands that you're specifically familiar with, but the organizations will be sophisticated enough to be able to have kind of those MBA level opportunities as you advance through your career.
And this next slide is actually folks that I attended the program with. So I graduated in 2009, but I included some folks from the class of 2008 here as well. Before we jump into the guts here, think of it this way. Your first role, you probably got a piece of a brand. About 5 years in, those folks we just talked about with that brand management title or brand manager title, have a brand. And then once you get above that, you probably have a portfolio of brands beyond that. And it typically is at this director title. Now, what's I think also of interest to point out with these job titles is only one of the 5 people on this slide actually started at the organization they're in today. So this first one, a director of marketing for Emerald and Diamond, nuts. She was at PepsiCo for 8 years before moving into a director role at Snyder's-Lance in Charlotte. Pinnacle Foods, he started at General Mills and wanted to be in the New York City metro area, and so he's now in a marketing director role there. So there's a lot of mobility opportunities within the consumer products industry once you've started at a place like Pepsi or General Mills. Beyond that, I'd say because of the general management aspect of the job, there are opportunities in industries and spaces far beyond consumer products. So the last 2 titles on here, the Vice President of Digital Strategy and Innovation. He graduated in 2008, started at Whirlpool, spent some time at Emerson, both in marketing capacities, and now he works with what's essentially a creative agency that works with clients to connect with brands. And then the VP of Client Deployment and Innovation, this is a startup that a colleague of mine who started with me at Procter & Gamble now works at. He has been involved in all kinds of startup and venture capital type activities since leaving the program. But that foundation he built as a general management type of guy at Procter & Gamble is what ultimately enabled him to do that. So a lot of diversity of future opportunities can spring from a few years in the consumer products industry.
The other thing I'll kind of tack onto that in terms of versatility for brand management is that I think it was Forbes a couple of years back did a survey of where C-suite executives came from, and they found out that I think it was more Fortune 500 CEOs had started at Procter & Gamble than any individual MBA program anywhere in the world. So in terms of kind of having the right experience, and again, that general management, being able to see the entire scope of the business, that's something that really sets you up well for executive roles in the long term, if that's something that you're interested in.
That's right.
So, all right, taking a look at kind of where our students go in the short term. One of the other things I want to kind of touch on here too, what does the internship process look like for brand management? How important is that in terms of getting a full-time brand management role?
Okay, that's a good question. We talked about brand management being one of the most open to career change, and that's absolutely true. I would say generally, for whatever reason, if you cannot get in through an internship, it will be challenging. And it's not because they don't value full-time hires. It's that their entire industry has been built around this pipeline of internships. So most companies will take an approach like this. Say, for example, Procter & Gamble brings in 40 interns for a summer. Their goal is to give 40 offers. Because if they can give 40 offers and lock those folks down, they don't have to do any more recruiting. And so they probably don't give out 40 offers, but they probably get close to 30, and a high percentage of students would then take those roles. And so then the dominoes fall from there, and there just aren't as many roles available from a full-time recruiting perspective. So it is pretty critical to get into an internship that can then lead to a full-time opportunity. And I'd say, it doesn't necessarily have to be at the same company. If you were to, for example, get an internship at Procter & Gamble and get an offer from that, that's highly leverageable with other organizations. Really what they're looking for is, have you done the work for at least 10 to 12 weeks? And did some other industry-leading firm vet you, in a sense, and consider you worthy of getting an offer? If you can check those boxes, then the list of companies that would be interested in you after that is pretty long.
I'll add a personal anecdote onto that. So I was a career changer coming into the program, knew I wanted to get into brand management, but my internship ended up being with Amazon, which is not a traditional place for brand managers to go. And when I was going through my final round of interviews for full-time jobs for brand management, I got the final round with the one company that was number one on my list, was doing really well on it, and their VP for marketing said, "Why didn't you get a brand management internship last summer?" And I had all my reasons. Just said, "Okay, that's nice, but you don't have the experience I want." And I ultimately didn't get the job with that company. I did ultimately get a job in the industry I wanted, in the function that I wanted, but it was definitely a lot harder than it needed to be. because I didn't have that explicit background that they were looking for. So some companies that matters a little bit more than others, but definitely having 10 to 12 weeks of that experience is a really great way to set yourself up for success for full time.
That's right. So you can see the numbers on the slides here for both internship and full time. You see more students accepting roles in marketing and sales than in consumer products. And that's really just driven by the rise in the technology industry and the product management roles that are available there. So, probably for every 2 marketers that we graduate, 1 goes into consumer products and 1 looks outside of consumer products. And I would expect that trend to continue moving forward.
So one of the things I want to kind of call out on this slide too is you're thinking about average starting salaries and comparing it across programs and across functions. With consumer products especially, they seem to focus in areas that tend to be a little less of your kind of major urban centers. So keep that in mind. A lot of your finance roles are going to be in New York or San Francisco or Chicago. A lot of your consulting placements are going to be, again, in those big metropolitan centers. A lot of your top consumer products companies are either going to be in mid-sized cities like a Cincinnati or a Pittsburgh, or they may even be a Fortune 500 company that's in a small town in Wisconsin or something like that. So if you're thinking about that just from a pure dollars and cents standpoint, add in a little bit of factor for cost of living adjustment as well. $100,000 in Cincinnati goes a heck of a lot farther than it does in New York City.
Yeah, and just on that geography piece, most of these consumer products companies sprouted up over 100 years ago. And the world was obviously a lot different place then. And so, if they could restart, would they go to San Francisco, New York, or Chicago? Maybe. But, they've got such deep roots in the cities that Joe mentioned earlier that that's what drives a lot of those geographic factors.
So in terms of kind of specific companies, these are kind of a smattering of some of the companies that our students have gone to in the last year or two. You've got some of your biggest CPG companies in the world that are here. Most of these names should look pretty familiar to you. Again, probably the one outlier on here is L Brands, which I'm assuming most of you haven't heard of, but I'm guessing most of you have heard of Victoria's Secret and Bath and Body Works. That's the parent company for them. So pretty good smattering of companies. And again, a lot of these have big portfolios of brands that sit underneath. They'll have 10, 15, 20 brands that fall under the parent company that create a little bit more opportunity as you're going through. All right, so we're going to get to your questions in just a second, so feel free, go ahead and send any of those through on the Q&A. I do have a couple more housekeeping things just to kind of keep in mind. So some upcoming events from the admissions team. We'll be participating in all the Forte forums around the country in the next couple weeks. So Forte Foundation focuses specifically on promotion of women in business roles. So those are targeted in most of the major metro centers throughout the country in the next 2 weeks. We'll have admissions reps in all of those cities. The Diversity MBA Admissions Conference in Los Angeles is August 19th. We'll have a representative as well. If we have anyone from South America with us today, I'm going to be down there for about 2 weeks doing the QS World Tour as well, so I'd love to be able to speak to you there. If we do have any military vets on board with us today as well, we will have an on-campus preview weekend, September 28th through the 30th, and you'll be getting specific communications about that for registration as well, so keep your eyes open for that. We'll also tee up the next webinar here. So in 2 weeks, we'll continue with the career series. Next time, we'll take a look at careers in investment banking. That's going to be on August 23rd, which is a Wednesday, and we'll keep it at the same time. I'll be joined by another one of our career coaches who's got a long history from Wall Street as well. So some good things to keep in mind. With that, we'll jump into some of your questions about brand management. I'll start here with a question about academics. What's the difference academically between brand management and product management?
Or is it project management?
Or project management, yes. We do all, well, we can do both. So I'd say from a brand management and a product management standpoint, there's probably not a ton of difference academically between the two. A lot of your skill sets are going to overlap. The one thing that I would probably say from a brand management standpoint that you want to focus a little bit more on is some of those more numbers-driven technical skills, because you will do a lot more in terms of budgeting and forecasting as you're going through that. So, making sure you're up on those technical skills. And then I think the data visualization is a really useful skill there too. And there are a couple of specific classes that work with either specific tools or data visualization in general. Project management again tends to be a little bit different from a career path standpoint. Those are going to be usually a little more focused into some kind of specific target industries. Again, I'd say most of the skills will probably overlap. That's probably going to be a little bit more heavy on your leadership and communication focus. All right, next question. If you have a specific company in mind that doesn't necessarily recruit on campus, can the Career Center work with you to create that relationship?
I mean, that's ultimately what we're here for. Now, I'd say generally it doesn't work when we reach out to a company on behalf of a student, because in many cases the recruiters will just think we're trying to shill. But what we do is we put you in position to leverage all the resources we have available to us and to interact with our alumni base. And by and large, Notre Dame is going to have representatives in any company you've heard of. And so we can help facilitate interactions with alumni that can then serve as internal referrals within organizations to put you in position to get at least interview opportunities. For us, we're a fairly small program with a fragmented student body. And so we do, especially for brand management, have to look outside of campus in many cases. And so either leveraging our alumni or finding even other opportunities to engage with them. There are national recruiting conferences available to MBA students, for example. And basically, if there's a consumer products company you've heard of, they're going to have a presence at those kinds of events. And so we can prep you for those events. We travel to those events to provide real-time support. And those can be good ways to engage with companies that don't recruit on campus as well.
All right. Is a foray into brand management feasible for prior software engineers? Are companies ready to take in software engineers for brand management?
I mean, I would generally say it's hard to know until I know more about you, but I would say yes. I came from a military background, so I was an intelligence officer in the Air Force for 8 years before coming to get my MBA. I'd say at least as few relevant translatable skills as a software engineer would have, and as long as you can sell strong leadership, communications skills, as well as passion for marketing, I think they're open to it. Now, of course, there's you've got to be able to sell yourself in the room and highlight experiences from your past that translate to things that brand managers would do. But I've never seen organizations discriminate against really any background when it comes to getting into brand management roles.
Yeah, I'll second that. As a fellow career changer here, I made wine for 2 years before going into brand management. So, I was essentially looking at the MBA as a way to be able to make that jump into the function that I wanted to be in, and used it to pick up the skills that I would be able to translate, the skills that I was missing to be able to translate into a full-time role. So, yeah, I would say that the background's not prohibitive, but again, a lot of it's how you tell your story and how you present yourself when you get in the room. All right, a couple of questions about international going both ways here. How do you see the market for students with an F1 visa or who will require visa sponsorship for employment? And then kind of a follow-on to that, what percentage of international students can find a job in the U.S. after they graduate?
Yeah, so that's a good question and probably something we should have hit on. As much as brand management is open to career changers, it's probably one of the least rich areas for students who need sponsorship. And I don't think it's because organizations have anything against international students, and to that extent, they hire plenty of international students for example, finance or operations roles. But I think there's a really important cultural aspect to working in brand management, where it's hard to resonate with consumers at the macro scale in Milwaukee and Pittsburgh and places like that if you didn't grow up in the United States and understand the types of TV shows they watch and magazines they read and those kind of things. So generally within the United States, it's pretty tough to crack into brand management as an international student. Now, pause there. Most of these global consumer products companies have similar roles in different geographies. So we've had students take roles with Johnson & Johnson in China, or with Procter & Gamble in Latin America. And so if brand management is what you're chasing, more than necessarily working in the United States, there should be opportunities that you can pursue there. But if you're dead set on working in the United States for a consumer products company as an international student, it can be pretty tough.
Kind of a related question here about international opportunity. Are there international opportunities the other way for U.S. students looking to go and have an expat assignment?
I'm sure there are some organizations that offer them. I think those are on the decline. And I'd say on the decline at early stages of your career. It's very expensive for an organization to send you on an expat assignment. And so what they typically want to know is they're going to get some value on the back end from that. So they look at maybe the senior brand manager or associate director type role, where they start to look to send, for example, U.S. citizens to other geographies to work. So I'd say most of these organizations are global in nature and have opportunities overseas, but they tend to come a little bit later in the career than maybe they used to. And I'd say the increase in homegrown talent has also impacted that. In a lot of cases, there are MBA programs sprouting up in China and other parts of Asia that are now providing talent that's homegrown to do some of those jobs, and that's probably impacted international opportunities as well. So, I mean, it's hard to generalize. I know plenty of people who've gone to Europe or Asia for assignments, but I don't want to make it seem like it's very easy or it happens at a particularly early stage in a career.
All right, we've got a couple questions here that paint out specific backgrounds. I'm going to make them a little bit more general for everyone, but essentially, kind of looking at background. If you've got, roughly a couple of years worth of work experience in customer service and maybe a couple of marketing, do you need to gain more work experience specifically in marketing to safely land a job after the MBA?
I would not say need to gain more work experience in marketing. I'd say most of all, what you want to showcase is a track record of achievement. And so as you think about applying to MBA programs, building resumes, and those kinds of things, what I want to see on paper is that everywhere you've been is better because you were there. And so I don't really care where you did that, as long as I know that you drove results and had strong achievement. That's a starting point. Now, as you get into the nuance, let's say there's a tiebreaker between two candidates. If one has more marketing experience, that might very well sway the recruiters to lean that way. There's something to be said about highly relevant experience. And so we've had students come in with market research backgrounds that have had plenty of opportunities because consumer products companies recognize those skills and want them in-house. We've also seen folks come in with marketing experience. And then I'd say a fairly common transition would be from a sales type role in a consumer products company into marketing in a consumer products company. So sure, having strong sales, marketing, market research experience can help, but I would not use the word need. I don't think it's a requirement if you can sell yourself as a leader and somebody who's got a strong track record of achievement.
The other thing I'll add on to that is, our students on average come in with about 5 years worth of work experience. So, if you're kind of in that 4 to 6 year window of work experience, that's a pretty typical time to go back for an MBA. So you're kind of right in the sweet spot on that. Another year, pushing off a year may not make a ton of difference from that standpoint. Again, to Sean's point, if you can speak to it well, if you can talk to achievement, and you're comfortable with that, then pull the trigger and go ahead and do it. It's a great time to go, and that's kind of your sweet spot in terms of age range for coming back to get the MBA. So that's pretty typical. Another question here from a background standpoint as it relates to academics. If you're coming from a non-business background, are there specific courses that you recommend to prepare?
Well, so the first thing when you join an MBA program, I'd say most are similar in this regard. Your core curriculum is going to deliver a lot of the foundational knowledge you need. And so are there particular courses? Absolutely. You need to be good at finance. You need to have some analytical skills coming out. You need to know the marketing basics, a good handle on economics, courses in operations. All of those will be elements of your core curriculum. And I think most companies realize, regardless of your background, when you get into an MBA program, you're going to leave a well-rounded general management kind of student. And so you'll get most of that through your core. And then as you figure out your specific path, you said product management in the question. There are probably some courses that we recommend as electives. Maybe it's data visualization for product management instead of advertising management. That is maybe more relevant for brand managers. The good news in that is we've got a student services team on staff that will do advising appointments with you to help you figure out exactly which courses make the most sense given your career interests. In many cases, we work with the student services team to help them, work through that with you. But you'll have resources here to help you plot out your path. But most of your first year at most MBA programs is locked down in a core curriculum, and I think there's a reason for that, because we've identified the skills that are most critical for all students, and that should suit you well regardless of your specific path.
Yeah, the one other thing I'll add on there is, everybody's going to be a little bit different and kind of where the strengths need to be built up a little bit. So, that's the biggest thing, is just identifying where those weaknesses in your background individually may be and how do you combat that. I know for me, I didn't have a lot of data background, so I focused on taking classes that were a little bit more Excel heavy or data heavy. The other thing that you can do is in your internship, that's a really great way to pick up a lot of those skills as well. Especially for brand management with a lot of career changers, a lot of those people going into the internships, they want to be able to see the base skills, but a lot of your specific job relevant skills you'll pick up through your actual experience on the job as well.
Yeah, and Joe, I'd just like to add one other thing. As you think about preparing for any career path as an MBA, it's not just about the classroom. There are a lot of student organizations that you should actively involve yourself with to prepare yourself. For example, we've got a strong marketing club here. And so that will augment your formal classroom education with guest speakers and deep dive sessions and training events to make sure you're ready. So you're exposed to trends in the marketing world. You're drilled on how to successfully interview for those types of things. And so I would recommend, in addition to choosing your courses strategically, finding some organizations that can help build your knowledge quickly is a smart thing to do as well.
All right, a couple more questions here. Is the event and services industry complementary for the program? Yeah, I would say a lot of that is going to be very translatable. We have somebody who was a food and beverage director previously who just started the program this week. It's definitely something that we've seen before. And again, a lot of those skills are going to be translatable both in terms of communication, attention to detail. Anytime you're putting on events, there's a lot of moving pieces. You got to work with a lot of different types of people. So that's definitely something that would translate well into this type of career field as well from a background standpoint. This one's a little off topic, but we'll knock it out as well. What's the best MBA track for startups? We actually do have an entrepreneurship and innovation track specifically. So that's definitely your best way to go. Again, with the ability to have multiple concentrations, though, it's great to be able to augment with some additional an additional concentration to either round out the skills or, depending on kind of specifically what type of startup you're interested in, really set yourself up with that standpoint. One of the other things I'll mention too that's an on-campus opportunity, there is a pretty big business plan competition that runs every year here on campus. Traditionally that ends up being a little bit more heavy into science and tech, new innovation, things like that. But the winner at every stage this year was a consumer product company. So they launched a new concept for essentially taking perishable food and turning it into like a dessert product kind of thing. So there's definitely opportunities there that are both relevant to this industry and within the entrepreneurship space as well. All right, a little bit of a general question here. Do we require a bachelor's degree for internationals? We do require a bachelor's degree for internationals in terms of 3 years versus 4 years. A lot of it depends a little bit on kind of the accreditation in the background. I'd say the question asked specifically from India. Typically, most of the the students that we're seeing coming from India, we do get a lot of folks from NITs and IITs on the technical side. But your standard undergrad programs in business or economics from like the University of Mumbai or University of Delhi, something like that, those are all in play as well. And we have had a number of students that have come from those backgrounds in the past. All right, so it looks like you guys are all out of questions, so we'll go ahead and finish up a little early here. If you do have other questions that pop up along the way, feel free to get in touch with the admissions office. You can always shoot an email to mba.business@nd.edu, or go on the website and kind of surf around for some of those things. One of the other things I always recommend for prospective students is to get in touch with some of the current students that are out there. So on the website, there's a feature called Contact a Student. You can go on and see some of the backgrounds and profiles of current students that are here and reach out and ask questions, get a little bit more of a personal perspective. Sean and I went through the program, but it's been a couple of years, so they might have a little bit of a different take on it than we do. So they're always a really great resource. I encourage you to reach out to them. But thanks so much for joining us today. Again, our next webinar will be August 23rd at 12 p.m. for Careers in Investment Banking. Probably a little different for most of the folks that are on this webinar, but please feel free to join us for that. We'll send out timing and registration for that probably early next week. So thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.